And spokesperson for Gisha, the Legal Centre for the Freedom of Movement, Miriam Marmur, joins me in studio, along with I24 News senior correspondent Jordana Miller. Ladies, great to have you. Miriam, we'll get you to kick us off. Talk us through the status of the two Americans that are, in fact, waiting clearance to be allowed to go into the Gaza Strip later in the month.
So the two Americans are part of a group, a delegation of 10 physicians and medical professionals who, with the organization Physicians for Social Responsibility, have visited Gaza something like 12 times over the last decade. So going once, maybe twice a year, and basically offering assistance and guidance to medical professionals in the Strip, as well as specialized treatment to patients in Gaza who are in need of
and
special
only
treatment.
2 of the 10 were singled out as waiting, needing further clearance to enter. Tell us a bit about that.
So despite the fact that, again, this group has been to Gaza on numerous occasions in the past, this is the first year that Israel basically initially decided to deny the entrance of all 10 members of the delegation. Initially, as you said, the arguments that were presented were because some of the members of the organization were Jewish and because of alleged connections to pro-BDS politics. Both of those claims were basically taken back, withdrawn. After Gisha submitted its petition on September 20th, Israel basically withdrew those claims and decided to allow 8 of the 10 doctors to enter Gaza. So what Israel is saying is that because the 2 remaining petitioners who were proceeding with the petition on their behalf, because they're Jewish, that there needs to be some kind of special security examination to see whether or not they would be allowed to enter Gaza.
Jordana, talk us through that. Why would that be a consideration that their Jewishness would prevent them from going into the Gaza Strip?
Well, Israel will argue that their Jewishness might put them in danger, pose a risk to them in the Gaza Strip. Right now, it's a particularly volatile time there, and there's all kinds of security concerns. Perhaps they will be harmed in some way, or kidnapped, or used as some kind of political tool against Israel. But critics say, of course, this is just a cover, and that Israel, in a sense, by saying that they have some kind of connection to the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, that is why they're not being let in. And for many, they see this as a way to kind of silence dissenters.
What do you say to that, Miriam?
Well, it's also important to emphasize the fact that both of these people have been to Gaza. One of them has been to Gaza a total of 7 times in the past, the other 2 times. And this is a leading senior neurosurgeon with years of experience and someone who has over 30 years experience as a clinical social worker offering victims of trauma mental support. So what we're saying is that they are, you know, an integral part of. So
if Israel is allegedly trying to look out for their safety, what do you say to that? You're wanting them to go in at their own risk, or what are you pushing
Basically,
for?
what we're saying is that these are 2 adults that have decided on their own volition and based on their past experiences of going into Gaza and being hosted in Gaza. But they say that, you know, their hosts in Gaza have always been aware of their Jewish identity and that has never posed a problem in the past.
Israel should, I suppose, put its responsibility to, of course, it has to monitor who's coming across the border and who it's letting, I suppose, allowing them to take that risk on themselves, being adults or not. Should Israel just put that to the side and let anyone in knowing that it could in fact be a risk to their life?
Well, again, these are people who have been let into Gaza by Israel in the past. In fact, in the last visit of the delegation in 2016, the coordinator of government activities posted a picture of some of the members of the delegation on their way into Gaza at Erez Crossing, basically kind of priding itself on allowing this kind of humanitarian assistance to enter the Strip where it's needed. So yeah, what we're saying is that they should be allowed in again.
All right, Jordana, you were in the courtroom with Lara Alqasem today, a separate case, a 22-year-old American student hoping to come into Israel to study at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Talk us through in terms of what this court case is doing, in terms of the questions it's raising around the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement.
It was such a fascinating case today because it really is raising the question of how do we define who is a BDS activist? Is it someone who engages in activities that call on a boycott of Israel? Is it someone who just calls for boycotts in the West Bank? Is it someone who merely supports organizations that call for boycotts? And those are all the things that are very unclear. And these two sides, the State of Israel and the lawyers representing Alqasem, are essentially fighting over this central issue, with Alqasem's lawyers saying, this is a girl who never personally took part in any boycotts against the State of Israel. There's no evidence to support that, while the state is saying that she was the president of a pro-Palestinian group at the University of Florida.
Israel alleges not only a pro-Palestinian group, but they believe an anti-Semitic and quite violent BDS group. That's what they'll allege.
This is a group that is affiliated with the BDS movement. We could call it a branch of the BDS movement. But this, according to, Alqasem's lawyers, and they presented evidence of this, this was a very small group, a handful of kids, and she really played a nominal position as president. That's what they argued.
All right, I want to bring another voice into this conversation. Attorney Simcha Rothman joins me now. Simcha, great to have you with us. First of all, talk us through this new BDS law and whether this particular law case with Alqasem is in fact relevant to this new law. All right, it seems like we're having some technical difficulties there. We'll try and get back in touch with Simcha there. Let's move back into studio because, Jordana, there's another perspective that some people are holding here, those that are supportive of the BDS movement, is that Alqasem is in fact violating the movement in and of itself and undermining it by the fact that she is wanting to study in Israel in the first place. Talk us through that discussion.
Right. Well, now Alqasem is being kind of appropriated by all kinds of different groups. And of course, if she was ever a supporter of the boycott, divest and sanction movement, then of course those people would see her choice in coming to Israel to study for a year at Hebrew University, spending money on tuition and rent and all kinds of other things. They would see that as a real abandonment and a betrayal of the BDS movement. Because remember, the BDS movement is really about avoiding the State of Israel and in some way isolating and punishing Israel to put pressure on it and criticize its policies in the West Bank, or as some say, all of Israel now.
All right, let's go back to Simcha. We have in fact managed to get him back online. Simcha, I asked you a question before. Unfortunately, we couldn't hear you. Talk us through how this BDS law works and whether it is in fact relevant to this case with Lara Alqasem.
So basically, the law does not say that the Minister of Interior can prevent someone from coming. It actually forbids someone who was involved in the BDS to come unless he gets a special approval for special reasons that has to be noted specifically. Because the default is, and the law says, if you were involved in initiating a BDS activity against Israel, and you cannot enter Israel, and the minister cannot give you any way to come in unless there is a special reason. Now, of course, anyone who comes to Israel has a special reason, the same special reason you spoke about, that he is now not boycotting Israel because he's coming to Israel. That's not good enough reason. We don't know exactly the reason why someone comes in. He might sometimes use it afterwards. He can say, oh, I experienced it firsthand, and make more lies about Israel. We have to remember this organization, that she was a president of one of its branches, is an anti-Semitic and of course anti-Israel, but also just spread lies on Israel, and it's part of a war. Israel is under a BDS war. And to ignore it is like not to understand the reality.
But I just have to interrupt you there, Simcha, with respect to, are people allowed to have differences in opinion? Are people allowed to disagree with Israeli policies?
People can have any opinions they want to, and of course, anyone who is a citizen of Israel or is a permanent resident of Israel, this law does not apply to him. But Israel does not have to bring anyone that wants to come in. It's a privilege to come here. If you're not a citizen of Israel, if you're not a permanent resident of Israel, We don't owe you anything.
So in this case of Alqasem, though, of Lara Alqasem specifically, does the law, does this law apply to her?
She arranged, from the information that was published, she arranged BDS events against Israel and Israeli products. We have to understand, BDS is not criticizing Israel government. I criticize Israel government all the time. It's not a problem of the criticism. It's to make Israel illegitimate country. It's an illegitimate state.